The Song of the Four Sidewalks, Chapter 1. The city had its own rhythm: footsteps on concrete, honking of taxis, conversations floating between tall buildings. In the late afternoon, the pace picked up. It was rush hour downtown, that time between work and home, and the city moved faster. At the intersection of Maple and Fifth, four different sidewalks converged. They were unremarkable slabs of concrete, worn smooth by countless footsteps, cracked in places where tree roots had slowly pushed through. People walked over them without thought. They were just paths from one place to another. Yet it was here, at this ordinary corner, that Elias chose to stand against the city's pace. He arrived just as the shadows began to lengthen, carrying his cello case with care. His movements were unhurried, a quiet rebellion against the energy swirling around him. Elias was quietly dignified. His weathered face showed 70 years of life, with deep lines around clear, bright eyes. His clothes were clean but worn: a dark sweater with leather patches at the elbows, trousers pressed but fraying slightly at the cuffs. There was nothing remarkable about him, yet something in his deliberate movements caused occasional glances from hurried passers-by. He set his stool precisely at the corner where the four sidewalks met. It was a wooden three-legged affair that had accompanied him for more years than most marriages lasted. From his pocket, he produced a folded square of fabric, once crimson, now faded to the color of old brick, and laid it on the concrete beside him. Then, with careful hands, he opened the scuffed black case. The cello within was different from its owner. It showed no signs of age or wear. Its wood gleamed amber. The strings caught the afternoon light and seemed to hum even before he touched them. Elias removed it from its velvet bed with the tenderness one might use to lift a sleeping child. A businesswoman in a charcoal suit swerved to avoid him, her eyes never leaving her phone screen. A young couple, laughing, nearly tripped over his case. A street vendor selling pretzels from a cart across the intersection called out his wares. The city continued its dance around him, oblivious to what was happening at its feet. Elias settled the cello between his knees, its weight familiar and comforting. He closed his eyes for a moment, his hands resting on the instrument. In that brief pause, he seemed to be listening, not to the noise around him, but to some interior music, a melody only he could hear. His breath deepened, his shoulders relaxed, and when he opened his eyes again, they held a quiet certainty. He raised his bow. The first note emerged not as an intrusion into the urban symphony, but as a revelation of something that had always been there, hidden beneath the noise. It was low and resonant, a single sustained tone that seemed to vibrate the very molecules of air. Those nearest to him registered the sound with their bodies first: a teenager with headphones, a woman walking a small dog, a man in a business suit. Something in their posture shifted. Their cells seemed to respond to the call. Then Elias began to play in earnest. The melody was not simple, but neither was it complex. It moved like water, sometimes flowing gently, sometimes rushing with force. Each note seemed both surprising and inevitable. It was music that asked questions without giving answers. Music that opened doors without showing what lay beyond. There was sorrow in it, certainly. A deep acknowledgement of pain that reached the chest, not just the ear. But there was something else too. Resilience. Wonder. A strange, stubborn joy that persisted despite everything. As he played, Elias remained still except for the fluid movement of his arms. His eyes stayed open, but they weren't focused on his hands or the street around him. They seemed to look beyond the physical scene, as if he were watching the music itself take flight. The city continued around him. Traffic lights changed from red to green and back again. The sun inched lower in the sky. Most people passed by without a second glance, their rhythms uninterrupted, their attentions elsewhere. Some noticed but chose not to stop. Perhaps they had trains to catch, or meetings to attend, or dinners growing cold. Some paused for a moment, inserted $1 or $2 into the red cloth, and continued on their way with a slight adjustment to their step. And some stopped. Some truly heard. The music poured from Elias's cello, flowing outward along the four sidewalks that stretched away from him like points on a compass. The notes hung in the air, visible only in the momentary changes they wrought on those who passed through them. A slight pause in step, a turned head, a fleeting expression crossing a face before disappearing. Most moved on without breaking stride, their rhythms unchanged. Others lingered for seconds before the current of the city swept them away. A few remained longer, hovering at the edges of the intersection. Elias played on, focused neither on those who stayed nor those who left. He played without expecting anything in return. Catherine Mercer's day was measured in 15-minute increments. At 3:30 p.m., she sat in the back of a sleek black town car inching through midtown traffic, precisely where her calendar dictated she should be. The leather seat beneath her creaked as she shifted, phone pressed to her ear. "We need those projections before the Asian markets open," she said, eyes fixed on her tablet where rows of numbers glowed blue against white. "I understand the constraints, Peterson, but this deal doesn't care about your daughter's recital." She ended the call and leaned her head back. The familiar pressure behind her right eye signaled the approach of a migraine. 3 more calls, 2 meetings, then home to prepare for tomorrow's board presentation. The car slowed to a stop. "Sorry, Ms. Mercer," her driver said, gesturing at the sea of brake lights ahead. "Accident at 7th. GPS is suggesting we reroute through the side streets, but with rush hour." Catherine checked her watch, a slim, elegant timepiece that had cost more than her first car. "I'll walk from here. The Baxter meeting is at the Meridian building, right?" "Yes, ma'am. 6 blocks south, 3 west." "Perfect. I need to clear my head anyway." She gathered her briefcase and stepped onto the sidewalk. The transition from the car's quiet interior to the street was jarring. Noise surrounded her. Horns, voices, thousands of footsteps. Heat rose from the concrete. Catherine straightened her charcoal suit jacket and began walking south, her heels striking a precise rhythm on the pavement. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. "Beijing team requesting call before they leave office. Critical. Available in 45? Catherine typed a swift reply without breaking stride. "Schedule for 4:15. Send prep docs now." Her mind was already structuring the Beijing call. They'd want reassurance about regulatory hurdles. They'd want contingency plans for the supply chain disruptions in Malaysia. She'd need to project confidence without overpromising. It was a delicate balance, one she'd perfected over 20 years. A notification appeared on her screen. Email from her mother. "Missed you at dinner again. Call when you can. Love you." Catherine swiped it away. She'd respond later, when she had mental bandwidth to craft a reply that wouldn't lead to another conversation about her work hours, her perpetually empty refrigerator, her non-existent social life. Her mother meant well. But she'd never understood that for Catherine, work wasn't just work. It was the only language she'd ever been truly fluent in. She was so absorbed in this mental arithmetic that she nearly missed the change. The city's noise had shifted, subtly altered by something new. Something was different in the air around her. Catherine looked up. The intersection ahead was crowded with the usual rush-hour mass of humanity: food vendors, tourists, workers heading home, all moving in their prescribed patterns. But at the corner, something had disrupted the flow. People were moving around an obstacle, like water around a stone in a stream. Karen snapped photos from multiple angles: the musician's weathered hands, the cello's polished wood, her children listening with expressions of polite interest. She was already envisioning how these would look in the vacation album, evidence of their cultured New York experience. "Should we give him some money?" Tom asked, fumbling for his wallet. "Oh yes, definitely," Karen said, dropping a $20 bill into the open case. "Thank you," she called to the musician, who nodded graciously while continuing to play. "This is nice," Karen said after a few minutes, "but we should probably get going if we want to make it to the High Line before it gets too crowded." "Can we get ice cream now?" Lily asked, already losing interest in the music. "I saw a cafe right across the street," Tom said, pointing to a place with large plate glass windows. "Perfect spot to rest before we tackle the High Line." They moved away from the corner, back into the flow of pedestrian traffic. As they approached the cafe, they passed a park bench where a young man sat hunched over his phone, his expression a mask of concentration. Lily, looking back, watching the cellist continue to play and not watching where she was going, bumped directly into the man's knee. Chapter 4. "Sorry," a woman's voice called out as a young girl hurried past, her family trailing ahead of her. Leo barely acknowledged them with a nod, his attention already returning to his phone as the teenage boy's voice carried back to him, saying something about ice cream flavors. Another happy family, another reminder of a normal life that seemed increasingly out of reach. His thumb continued, scrolling through job listings. Each swipe revealed another position he was either overqualified or underqualified for, another carefully worded rejection waiting to happen. Junior analyst, 3 to 5 years experience required. Marketing coordinator, MBA preferred. Sales associate, base plus commission. 2 months since the layoff. 2 months of watching his savings dwindle. 2 months of crafting cover letters that struck the impossible balance between desperation and confidence. 2 months of explaining to his mother, during their weekly calls, that yes, he was fine, just waiting on a few promising leads. His phone battery indicator flashed red, 15% remaining. Leo switched to his email. 2 automated rejection notices, a reminder that his credit card payment was due in 3 days, and an email from his landlord about late rent payments. The screen blurred before his eyes. Leo blinked hard and put the phone away. The weight in his chest, his constant companion these past weeks, grew heavier. It was a physical presence now, pressing against his lungs, making each breath deliberate work. Around him, the park bustled with summer afternoon energy. Office workers lounged on the grass, eating late lunches. Tourists looked at guidebooks. Children chased pigeons across the open space. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere, to have a purpose, a destination, a reason to be where they were. Everyone except Leo. He stood abruptly, unable to bear his own stillness any longer. Movement was a poor substitute for progress, but it was all he had. He left the bench and joined the flow of pedestrians on the sidewalk. The city had once felt like possibility to Leo. He'd arrived 4 years ago with a freshly printed business degree and unshakable conviction that hard work inevitably led to success. He'd found an apartment in Astoria and a job at a marketing firm that had seemed promising, friends who were similarly striving and hopeful. The future had stretched before him, not without obstacles, but navigable. Now the same streets felt like a maze with no exit. Every corner brought another reminder of things he could no longer afford, opportunities no longer accessible, a life slipping away while he scrambled to hold on to its edges. His feet carried him west. That's when the first note reached him. It cut through the street noise like a beam of light through fog. Clear, resonant, impossibly pure. Leo's steps faltered. The sound came again. Not a single note this time, but a phrase. A question posed in a language both unfamiliar and deeply known. Almost against his will, Leo found himself turning toward the source. A small crowd had gathered at the corner ahead, forming a loose semicircle around an old man with a cello. Leo approached cautiously, as if the music might be frightened away by sudden movement. He stopped at the edge of the crowd, half hidden behind a taller man in a business suit. The cellist's eyes were closed, his weathered face serene in concentration. His hands moved over the strings with decades of practice behind them. He drew forth a melody that seemed to bypass the ear entirely and speak directly to something deeper. Leo felt the knot in his throat begin to loosen. Maya Maudry stood in a contemporary art gallery in Chelsea, surrounded by white walls and strategic lighting, staring at a massive canvas of intersecting geometric shapes. She felt nothing but dull academic appreciation. Through the large, plate-glass window of the gallery, she caught sight of a young man passing by. Their eyes met briefly, his, hollow with some private pain, hers, empty with creative drought. For a moment, Maya felt a strange connection to this stranger, as if they shared some fundamental hunger that neither could articulate. Then he was gone, continuing down the sidewalk, shoulders hunched against an invisible weight. Maya checked her watch. She'd been here for nearly 2 hours, moving from painting to sculpture to installation, searching for something that would spark even a flicker of the passion that had once driven her to pursue art. She'd found nothing, just more examples of skill without soul, technique without truth. She paused before the last installation, a room-sized construction of twisted metal and delicate paper forms suspended from the ceiling. The wall text explained its meaning in thick academic language, a meditation on the temporary nature of meaning in a post-truth landscape, questioning the spaces between constructed reality and authentic experience. Maya read the words 3 times, trying to connect them to the objects before her. She couldn't. The gap between intention and impact yawned wide, unbridgeable. With a sigh, she headed for the exit. The late afternoon sun momentarily blinded her as she stepped onto the sidewalk. "Did you enjoy the exhibition?" The gallery attendant stood just outside the door, taking a cigarette break. "It was interesting," Maya replied. The polite lie, obligatory. The woman snorted softly. "That's what people say when they hated it." She took a drag of her cigarette. "Can't blame you. Bunch of empty gestures if you ask me. But what do I know? I just work here." Maya smiled despite herself. "Empty gestures. That's exactly it. You an artist?" "I was. I am. I'm trying to be." Maya hesitated, surprised by her own honesty with this stranger. "I'm a student at Pratt. Or I was. I'm taking a break." "A break?" The woman nodded knowingly. "The why am I doing this break, or the how am I doing this break?" "Both, I guess." Maya shifted her messenger bag from one shoulder to the other. "I haven't made anything in months. Nothing real anyway. Nothing that matters." The attendant flicked ash onto the sidewalk. "Welcome to the club, honey. We meet at bars all over the city, drowning the death of our creative ambitions." She smiled to soften the words. "You'll figure it out. Or you won't. Either way, you'll survive." "Thanks for the pep talk," Maya said dryly. "Anytime. $5 for the therapy session." The woman stubbed out her cigarette and headed back inside, leaving Maya alone on the sidewalk with her thoughts. Maya began walking, no destination in mind, just movement to match the restlessness inside her. The familiar weight of her sketchbook pressed against her hip through the canvas bag, a constant reminder of her creative block. She hadn't opened it in weeks. What was the point? Every line she drew felt false, every composition forced. Her professors called it a creative block. Maya feared it was something more permanent, the realization that she had nothing meaningful to say. She walked east, away from the gallery district, into the more chaotic cross-section of the city, where tourists and locals, wealth and struggle, beauty and grime existed side by side. The buildings grew shorter, the storefronts less curated. Maya felt her shoulders relax slightly. There was honesty in this neighborhood. At least, no pretense, no theoretical frameworks justifying empty spaces. As she approached an intersection, a sound reached her that was so unexpected, so different from the urban noise around it that she stopped mid-stride. A cello. Not recorded, but live. The unmistakable resonance of wood and string and bow, vibrating through the air. Maya followed the sound to a corner where a small crowd had gathered. At its center, an elderly man sat playing a cello. He was completely absorbed, existing in a different reality from the bustling street around him. His eyes were half closed, his lined face neither smiling nor frowning, but utterly present in the act of creation. Maya stood at the edge of the crowd, transfixed. The music was unlike anything she'd heard before. It wasn't classical or modern. It followed no recognizable structure, yet had an internal logic that made each note feel inevitable. It spoke of sorrow without despair, joy without denial, complexity without confusion. It was, Maya realized, what she had been seeking in the sterile gallery rooms. Art that existed not to impress or theorize or sell, but because it needed to exist. Because the human spirit required its expression, as surely as the body required breath. She found herself moving closer, drawn by a pull as tangible as gravity. The crowd shifted, making space, and suddenly there was nothing between Maya and the cellist but a few feet of concrete sidewalk. Up close, she could see the details, his fingers, gnarled with age but moving with fluid precision. The cello itself, its wood burnished by decades of touch. The slight sway of his body as he leaned into particularly resonant passages. He wore no expression of strain or effort, only a profound concentration that bordered on serenity. Maya slipped her bag from her shoulder and lowered herself to a nearby bench, never taking her eyes from the musician. For the first time in months, perhaps longer, the constant chatter of her mind, the self-doubt, the analysis, the fear, had quieted, replaced by a single consuming focus on the unfolding melody. Time became fluid, stretching and contracting around the music. Maya couldn't have said whether she'd been sitting there for minutes or hours. People came and went around her, some pausing briefly before continuing their journeys, others lingering like her, entranced by unexpected beauty. As the cellist played, something began to shift inside her. It wasn't a dramatic revelation, but a gentle realignment, like scattered objects settling into their proper places after a long disturbance. The sense of disconnect that had plagued her for months, between her hand and her vision, her art and her truth, began to dissolve. The melody spoke directly to the part of her that had been silenced by doubt and academic theory, the part that had first picked up a pencil as a child, not to impress or succeed, but simply to make visible what she saw and felt. It reminded her of what art was before it became entangled with grades and galleries and grant applications. A form of witness, a way of saying, I was here, I saw this, I felt this, I'm alive. Without thinking twice, Maya's hand moved to her messenger bag. Her fingers found the familiar shape of her sketchbook, withdrew it along with a stick of charcoal. She balanced the book on her knees and opened it to a blank page. Her first marks were tentative, uncertain, not literal representation. She wasn't trying to draw the cellist, or the corner, or the crowd, but an attempt to translate what she heard into what she could see and touch. Lines that curved and intersected like the melody itself, and textures that echoed the richness of the cello's voice. Gradually, her hand moved with more confidence. The charcoal left bold strokes and delicate whispers on the paper, building a visual counterpoint to the auditory experience. Maya lost herself in the process, unaware of the curious glances of passers-by. There was only this: the music entering through her ears, traveling through her body, emerging transformed through her hand. She didn't try to understand or analyze what she was creating. Understanding would come later, if it came at all. For now, it was enough to be a conduit, to allow the music to move through her and become something new without being diminished. The light began to change. Street lamps flickered on, casting pools of artificial brightness. Still, the cellist played, and still, Maya's hand moved across the paper, both of them caught in parallel acts of creation. Then, with a phrase that felt both surprising and inevitable, the music came to an end. The final note hung in the air, resonating even after the bow left the string, and then gradually faded into the ambient noise of the city. The spell broke. The world rushed back in. Maya blinked, disoriented by the return to ordinary reality. Around her, the small crowd dispersed, people checking watches and phones, resuming conversations, returning to their own concerns. The cellist lowered his instrument, his movements unhurried, deliberate. His face showed neither triumph nor exhaustion, only the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Maya looked down at her sketchbook. The page was filled with a complex, organic composition, lines that flowed and eddied like water, shapes that seemed to breathe, textures that invited touch. It wasn't a picture of anything recognizable, yet it felt profoundly true. Not a representation, but a response, a conversation between music and Mark. For the first time in months, she had made something real. The cellist began to pack away his instrument, securing it in its case with the same care one might use for a sleeping child. Maya watched him, suddenly shy. She wanted to thank him, to explain what his music had awakened in her, but words seemed hopelessly inadequate. Instead, she tore the page carefully from her sketchbook, gathered her courage, and approached him. "Excuse me," she said softly. He looked up, his eyes clear and direct despite his age. Maya held out the drawing. Your music. This is what I heard." He studied the page for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a nod that somehow conveyed both acknowledgement and gratitude, he accepted the offering and carefully placed it in his case alongside the cello. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Creator had recognized creator. Gift had answered gift. The musician closed his case, nodded once more to Maya, and walked away, disappearing into the flow of the city. Maya remained at the corner, where 4 sidewalks met, her empty hands still tingling with the memory of creation. The weight of her sketchbook, lighter by 1 page, felt different against her hip now. It wasn't a burden of expectation, but a field of possibility. She took a breath and looked around, suddenly aware of the entire scene surrounding her. To her right, through the large window of the cafe across the street, she saw a family, a mother, father, teenage boy, and young girl, gathered around a table. The parents were looking at their phones, the boy was taking pictures of his elaborate ice cream sundae, the girl gazing out the window with a wistful expression. They were physically present, spiritually elsewhere, their attention scattered in a dozen directions at once. To her left, Maya's gaze followed the path leading toward the financial district, a river of humanity flowing between glass and steel. Sharp suits, determined strides, faces illuminated by the blue glow of devices. A world of calculated minutes and measured success. Maya glanced at the empty space on the bench near her. She could feel the echo of presence, the space that hope had briefly occupied before being choked out by worries. Finally, Maya looked at the empty corner where the old man had played. The musician was gone, his work complete, lives touched. Yet something remained, an invisible impression on the air, a melody that continued to resonate in those who had truly heard it. Maya stood alone at this intersection, the only witness to what had just unfolded. 4 paths stretching away like compass points. 4 ways of experiencing the same gift. 4 different responses to the same beautiful offering. The moment of music was gone, unrepeatable, existing now only in memory and impression. She looked at the blank page before her, at the 4 paths stretching away from this corner. Which path would she take tomorrow? Which response would she choose when the next beautiful offering came her way?